Black box warning? What does that mean? Oh well. Excitebike? In 1983, the video game market crashed to an extent not seen since. After a flood of subpar quantity over quality games, thousands of Americans lost faith in video game home consoles. I mean, this is what the box looks like, and here's the game you get. I think I've been catfished. When Nintendo was planning to bring the Famicom's American counterpart, the NES, to America, they knew they needed a good lineup of games to launch the system with, and thus was born the NES Black Box series. The games in the series aren't actually related in any way, they all just use the early NES box art template that fans have dubbed Black Box games. Despite many of the games being made in Japan, the series only existed in American and PAL regions. Since so many other game boxes, mainly Atari ones, had such misleading box art, Nintendo gave the American boxes pixel art so they would better match what the games would really look like. Certain PAL variants followed a similar template, but instead of the pixel art of the American versions, they used hand-drawn art, often recycled from the Famicom editions. It's often debated whether the American or PAL boxes are better, and I can't confidently say I think one is much better than the other. I like the black borders of the American versions more than the PAL, but I, like many, prefer the hand-drawn box art of the latter. I like both and love seeing them all lined up together. Each have their own strengths and weaknesses. A majority of the American Black Box games released in the NES's launch month. NES games are sometimes tricky to find the release dates, so I can't say for 100% certainty that all 18 of these games were launch titles for the NES. I can say with like 99.9% certainty that they were launch titles. 18 titles were released in October 1985. Then a year later, American NES games were no longer required to use the Black Box template, so releases in the Black Box series became more and more sparse. 9 more games in the series were released in America on June 1986, 2 more in March of 1987, and finishing the series in America with Slalom in August 1987. The series had an even 30 releases in America. PAL regions received 27 games in the series, lacking 10-Yard Fight, Baseball, Gyromite, and Stack Up from the American series. But the PAL series had one game that the American series didn't, and America never even got it all, Devil World. The series was split into sub-series in America with 7 different sub-series. These sub-series were divided by genre because the American boxes and cartridges had a little symbol for the 7 gameplay genres the games fall under. There's the arcade series, which contains ports/remakes of Nintendo arcade games for the NES. There are the light gun and robot series, which are groups of games that use the NES Zapper and Rob the Robot accessories, respectively. There's the sports series, which lived on even past the Black Box series, with its symbol on games like ice hockey. The programmable series featured games with level editors. The action series consists of more traditional game genres like platformers and fighting games. And there's the educational series, with only one game, and that being Donkey Kong Jr. Math. These sub-series are cute, but I have a few problems with them. Lots, and I mean a lot of the arcade ports weren't labeled under the arcade series. Why make an educational series and only use it for one game? But I forgive them because they put the sports series on ice hockey, and that makes me happy. It would be really cool if these sub-series could have continued to other NES games, or even Game Boy games. Now, instead of just listing every game and discussing it, I thought it would be more interesting to rank the series from worst to best. I'm going to be reviewing the American series because it has more games, and being American, I'm more familiar with my country's Black Box series. I'll be ranking the games based off fun, replayability, graphics, music, multiplayer, and accessibility. Starting off F tier, the worst Black Box series game is 30, Stack Up. Okay. So the biggest problem with this game is that you need a Rob accessory for it to work. For those who do not know, Rob was a toy robot that was compatible with 2 NES games. Stack Up involves inputting commands for Rob to execute to stack colored blocks in certain orders. If you don't have a Rob, you can't do anything with this game, and if you need a Rob, you will probably need an official cartridge, an original NES, an old TV, and all the cables. Even if you went through all that effort just to play this game, it probably wouldn't be that fun. The game has no idea if you put the blocks in the right order, so you can just select done whenever you want. I've also heard people say Rob knocks over the blocks when turning. There is just too much effort required for a decent experience at best. 29. Gumshoe. Just like Stack Up, Gumshoe requires an accessory to function, this time being the NES Zapper. Luckily for Gumshoe, the Zapper is much easier to find and cheaper to buy. Also on the Wii U eShop, NES games that use the Zapper were made available for the Virtual Console. Every black box Zapper game was available, except Gumshoe. Okay, well, even if you can't get an original NES Zapper, many emulators and unofficial systems can play Zapper games. Not that I would ever promote using an emulator. Nintendo, please send me free review copies. But just because this game is more accessible doesn't mean it's that much better. Gumshoe is an endless runner, and to jump you must shoot... I guess their name is Gumshoe? A lot of black box games, especially the Zapper ones, suffer from feeling like one-trick ponies, and no game validates that opinion quite like Gumshoe. There's still just way too much effort to go through for a subpar game. Moving on to D tier, we have 28, Pro Wrestling. This one isn't bad because you need accessories, it's bad because it's just kinda lame. Maybe it's just because I don't have the manual, but dear gosh, this game is confusing. Even if I did know what I was doing, it would still feel boring. This is like the NES version of doom scrolling. It's the first game on this list that has multiplayer, which is nice. The best part of the game is when you and another player chase the referee. There are some interesting character designs, I guess. Like, yeah, I would kill for Kincorn Karn to get in Smash Bros, but I still don't care for this game. If you're looking for an NES wrestling game, you have more and probably better options. 27, Urban Champion. If you had to pick a system that excelled at fighting games, I don't think the NES would be anyone's first pick. The game was heavily inspired by the Game & Watch game Boxing. Urban Champion is a very simple fighting game with, like, what, 2 attacks? 2 very similar attacks? There are events that can level the playing field, but they're not enough to make much of a difference. It's easy to find a cartridge, probably because no one wants it. It was also available on the Wii and Wii U eShop and the e-reader. It even got a whole remake on the 3DS. A remake! A remake of Urban Champion! The only reason I put this above Pro Wrestling is because it's funnier. And the graphics are better, I guess. 26. Tennis. Okay, now we're getting better. Tennis is not a very complicated sport, so making a game of it is always easy. The way the ball goes from side to side is cool in a technical sense. Mario is the judge for some reason. You can play this game on the NES, Wii, Wii U, 3DS, Switch, the e-reader, and even Animal Crossing. I mean, if you want a tennis game for the NES, it's probably your best option, but like, why do you want a tennis game for the NES? Like other sports games like baseball, soccer, and 10-yard fight, it makes sense to make a game of those sports because people can't play those sports in a field with 2 whole teams of players that know exactly what you want to do at whatever time you want to play. Playing tennis in real life is much more doable. Not saying tennis games shouldn't exist, I just think they're lower on the list of sports games priorities. If you disagree with that, that's completely fine, that's just my opinion. It doesn't really do anything wrong, just what it does is so, 25, Volleyball. If this game does something right, it gives you a lot of options. There's multiplayer, you can choose a region's team, and you can pick between male or female characters. The way the players serve the ball feels impactful and is animated nicely. Certain moves feel a little awkward to perform, but nothing that bad. The music is very repetitive, and the sound effects can get annoying. The thing that bugs me the most about this game is that you can only pause the game at certain times. Like, yeah, the animation of the little players running to the side whenever you pause is cute, but like I would trade it for being able to pause at any time. If you're looking for an original cartridge, this is the second most expensive game in the Black Box series. Most games in this series cost around $7 to $15, but Volleyball costs $15 to $25. Not too crazy or anything, but why this game? Luckily, if you don't have that kind of cash, it's available on the Switch and was available on the Wii. It's alright, but I've played better volleyball games, like Castle Crashers and Mario Odyssey. 24, Mock Rider. So this is a racing game with some combat features. The illusion of 3D with the track is a technical achievement, but combat is the reason the game is down here on the list. Your bullets only go like a few feet in front of you, and enemies sneak up behind you and kill you instantly. There's a screen showing you when enemies are coming from behind you, but the enemies go so fast that you barely have any time to react. You will see your character blow up and reassemble a lot. Speaking of your character, it's cool that this game did the main character was a girl the whole time? What? Twist before Metroid even did. I don't have much to say about this game, but this is probably as low as I can put it without making people mad. Because you can't mess with Mock Rider fans. 23. Pinball. How did they take such a fast-paced, satisfying game like Pinball and make it so boring? I like the simple graphics most of the black box games have, but this game went too simple. Everything is so geometrical and spaced out. There are barely any fun things to hit. And don't tell me this is all the NES can handle. Have you seen Pinbot? There's that weird Mario Breakout minigame that is the box art for some reason. Even though I have a lot of negative things to say about this game, it is pinball, and if you want pinball, it will give you a pinball experience. It won't be a great pinball experience, but it will be pinball, and it is a lot cheaper and more accessible than most of the games lower down. It's fine, but the moment I get Pinbot, I'm never touching this game again. 22. 10-Yard Fight. This was a port of an arcade game of the same name, and a pretty good port at that. Even as someone who isn't interested in football, I can have the occasional fun time playing this, but if you want a football game for the NES, you have plenty and, dare I say, better options. When I think of NES football, my mind goes to Tecmo Bowl, funnily enough another arcade port. It seems even Nintendo agrees, with Tecmo Bowl being on Nintendo Switch Online in the NES Classic Edition and 10-Yard Fight not being. Also, since Nintendo doesn't own the right to the 10-Yard Fight name, they can't easily re-release the game like the others in the series. The game has value, and it can scratch your football itch, but there's better you can do. 21. Soccer. Just barely beating 10-Yard Fight, we have soccer, which is still called soccer even in PAL regions. This is one of the more complicated sports in this series. All the players run in different directions, you switch between different players on the fly. The controls are good for the system, but some maneuvers still feel awkward. Turning specifically never clicked for me. But besides some iffy controls, the fact you can play multiplayer, choose your team's region, and its accessibility, soccer definitely has its strengths. Moving into C tier, we have 20. Wild Gunman. This game is essentially a quick draw game using the zapper. The ideal way to play is to keep the zapper by your side, and when the game says fire, pull up the gun and fire before your opponent can. But you can always keep the zapper on screen. You don't even need to aim properly. You can shoot at the cactus and the cowboys still die. There are 3 modes: quick draw with 1 opponent, quick draw with 2 opponents, and a saloon shootout. There is unfortunately no multiplayer, which yeah, your average NES player only has 1 zapper, but Nintendo did sell zappers separately to my research. Again, this game feels very one-trick pony. You can tell that this used to be an arcade machine. This game was ported to the Wii U, which was a very convenient way to play the game and how I first played it. The character designs for the cowboys are so great that they were used in Duck Hunt's Smash Bros. Moveset. The game was even in Back to the Future too. 19. Slalom. Can I show this? The last American black box game, and it was made by Rareware. As the name suggests, this is a skiing game. The way the snow path bends looks amazing for the system. Mock Rider's Road is probably more impressive, but I like Slalom Snow better. While fun, the game gets very repetitive very fast. The obstacles shake things up a little. It took me an embarrassingly long time to realize that these were ramps. Since the game is owned by Rare, Nintendo themselves can't re-release the game, so the only way to play the game on modern consoles is through Rare Replay for the Xbox One. But an original cartridge isn't that expensive. 18. Donkey Kong Jr. Math. Oh fun, just what I want after a long day of geometry. This game reuses elements of Donkey Kong Jr. to make the Black Box series' only educational game. The game gives you a multi-digit number, and you need to get that number by adding, subtracting, multiplying, and dividing single digits. If that sounds lame, it's better than it sounds, but if it sounds fun, it's worse than it sounds. The game was available on the Wii, Wii U, and Animal Crossing. An original cartridge costs... Whoa! Yeah, this is the most expensive American black box game by a landslide. It sold terribly. I wonder why. So only a few cartridges are in circulation. It's an alright game, but not worth that kind of money. 17. Clue Land. This game is very hard to describe. So you're in an area with a lot of pegs, and you use the pegs to make right or left-hand turns, so when you pass through certain pegs, a flipper crystal thing pops up, and you get all the flipper crystals while killing urchins with your blade blasts. I sound like I'm going insane, but I have no other way to describe it. This is a game where having the manual would be very beneficial. It feels very arcade-like, has a sort of Pac-Man or Bubble Bobble vibe. The game was re-released on the Game Boy Advance, Wii, Wii U, 3DS, Switch, and even the Sharp Zorus. The game works best as an arcade game in my opinion. It's something you play for a couple minutes and move on to the next game. 16. Popeye. This game is pretty cool because the Donkey Kong arcade game was heavily inspired by Popeye, and when Donkey Kong did well, Nintendo got the opportunity to make a real Popeye game. Funnily enough, the gameplay is very similar to Donkey Kong. Even if the graphics aren't as nice as the arcade version, the gameplay is just as good. The variety of moves and animations Bruno has is quite impressive. Since Nintendo doesn't own the rights to Popeye, the game hasn't had many re-releases, but an original cartridge isn't too expensive, so you still have options. 15. Baseball. We're halfway through the list. I quite enjoy this game despite the game's poor reputation. It's exactly what you'd expect from an NES baseball game. Batting is way more fun than being in the field, but you could say that about real baseball. This applies to most of the games on this list, but I think the game really shines with multiplayer. Even though baseball games are abundantly common, even on the NES, this one's sweet simplicity makes it my favorite baseball game. But the moment I play Super Mario Slugger, that will change. But seriously, I quite enjoy this game. 14. Wrecking Crew. Okay, now we're talking. I think this is the only real puzzle game in the Black Box series. The game involves Mario destroying parts of a construction site in particular orders. I think this game works better as a home console than an arcade game. The numerous levels make the game feel a lot more substantial than previous games like Clue Clue Land. The game has such a unique color palette. Rusty oranges, cheetah yellow, and indigo make the game stand out on a system with such limited colors. It's one of the few times I think the console version looks better than the arcade original. Even with all these nice things I have to say about the game, I'm not in love with it. The game gets repetitive, and with longer levels, the game gets old fast. The game is very accessible, with it being on the Game Boy Advance, Wii, Wii U, 3DS, and Switch. To finish this, look at this page from the manual. This is one of the funniest things I've ever seen. 13. Ice Climber. Finishing C tier, we have Ice Climber. We all probably first saw these little guys in Super Smash Bros., but I'll put aside my frustration with them being the black box rep in Smash for this ranking. The colorful graphics and silly sound effects are worth some praise. The gameplay is simple but effective. Just get to the top of the mountain. Many people have issues with the jumping mechanics. The jumping in this game has so little forward momentum and results in falling in pits more than I'm willing to admit. I do think the wonky jumping is on purpose though. The jank is just part of the experience. I don't think the jumping would be so scrutinized if the game wasn't so hard. The level design in this game is so difficult. Insanely fast clouds, conveyor belts, and slippery ice. The multiplayer is nice. Both players can play simultaneously instead of taking turns. The game is enjoyable, but if you have high expectations since the Ice Climbers are in Smash, prepare to be disappointed. 12. Golf. The highest rated sports series game on this list, Golf surprisingly is very technically impressive. The way you can angle your shot and objects will move as you turn gives the illusion of a 3D space. While many black box games are shallow in content, Golf has quite a bit of content, quite a few courses and clubs. There is a little bit of confusion on whether the player character is Mario or not. The player's guide Mario Mania claims the player character is Mario, but the game Captain Rainbow says the character's name Osan. Funnily, Osan was a considered name for Mario before he was named Mario. Golf was re-released on the PC, 88, Sharp X1, e-reader, Animal Crossing, Wii U, and 3DS. I find it strange that it wasn't on the Wii or Switch because Golf was the 10th best-selling NES game. I do have some complaints about Golf, the biggest being the lack of music. I know Golf is a sport played quietly, but if you're insisting you can't have any sounds while playing Golf for NES, you're taking this way too seriously. One last thing I want to mention about Golf, the programmer of this game was the late great Satoru Iwata. 11. Excitebike. From the 10th best-selling NES game to the 9th best-selling game, we have Excitebike. Despite motorbiking being a sport, the game isn't classified as a sports series game and instead a programmable series game. The programmable title comes from the game's feature to allow players to create and play their own racetracks. The game says you can save your tracks, but they get erased the moment you turn off/reset the system. That flaw aside, this is a solid package. This is a very informative experience for its director, Shigeru Miyamoto. Learning how to program a side-scrolling game would be crucial to one of his next works, we'll get to that later. The animation of this game is very smooth, and the sound effects work well. There isn't much in the way of music, but with how loud the bikes are, you probably wouldn't be able to hear it anyway. The game is very accessible, even being unlockable in its sequels. 10. Kung Fu. Now this is how you do a fighting game. Take notes, Urban Champion. This is one of the most basic games you could imagine. You walk from side to side and fight dudes and a boss at the end of the level. This literally feels like a game someone would be playing in a cartoon. This is the type of game that Finn and Jake would play on BMO. But I don't take that simplicity as a flaw. I quite like how basic the game is. A lot of the games in this list can be confusing or heavily require the manual, so something so understandable like Kung Fu is refreshing. This also probably has some of the best sound effects on this list. The punches, the kicks, and all the voices sound so good, especially for the NES. The game is a remake of the arcade game Kung Fu Master, so since Nintendo doesn't own the rights, this NES version has never been re-released to my research, but cartridges are quite cheap, so it's not rare. 9. Donkey Kong Jr. A port of the arcade game of the same name, this is quite a faithful port. The biggest difference is that levels are flatter due to the 4:3 aspect ratio of the NES. There are other small differences like some missing cutscenes and missing fruit, but I would say this is the most faithful arcade port on this list. They even got these cool sound effects on the third level to work on the NES. The game is on the shorter side, with only 4 repeating levels. It has a multiplayer mode, which is a good bonus. The game is very accessible, being available for the e-reader, Wii, Wii U, 3DS, Switch, and even Animal Crossing. The game was part of a bundle called Donkey Kong Classics for the NES. 8. Hogan's Alley. I know that may sound a little high, but hear me out. This is a zapper game about shooting the right targets as fast as possible. There are good targets and bad targets, and the bad targets can look very similar to the good targets, so you must be careful. There are 3 modes. The first has 3 targets that will cycle between good and bad targets in the left, right, and middle. The second mode is a scrolling camera where you shoot targets throughout a city, and the final mode is about repeatedly shooting cans before they can fall off screen. That is easily the most varied modes for the zapper games. All modes are similar enough to feel like the same game, but different enough to make them all feel distinct. The can one is my favorite. It's so satisfying to get them all the way to the left. The sounds of the shots are very snappy, and the animation of the target spinning after being struck feels so impactful. If anything is missing in the game, it would again be multiplayer mode. Again, it's a zapper game. If you didn't buy it on the Wii U eShop when it was available, you're going to need an original cartridge. That's the only way. The only way to play it. 7. Gyromite. This is the other Rob-compatible game, and it is much higher than Stack Up. The game is a puzzle platformer with the goal to collect all the sticks of dynamite before the time runs out. There are orange and blue pipes that need to be raised and lowered to progress through the levels. The most common way to move the pipes is to use Rob, but the game also lets you move the pipes using a second controller. So if you have a friend to play this with, it is an excellent 2-player game. There's even a multiplayer mode that lets you switch between platforming or moving the pipes. I suppose it is possible to play the game by yourself, but you're still going to need 2 controllers. Since most people think using Rob is the only way to play the game, it's quite cheap. Even if it requires a lot more work than the rest of the games on this list, it is a fun puzzle platformer, definitely worth your time. These last 6 are all in A tier, so if I could recommend any black box game, it would be these next 6. 6. Donkey Kong 3. This is a port of an arcade game of the same name. The game entails spraying Donkey Kong with bug spray. I always thought this was an underrated game, mixing elements of platformers, arcade shoot-em-ups, and bullet hells. While not as good as the arcade version, it still gives you the Donkey Kong 3 experience. There are a handful of levels, but with the game's intense difficulty, that isn't too bad. It has multiplayer mode, which is always a nice bonus. Even if the graphics and animation aren't as good as the arcade original, they are still good. The game is very accessible, being on the Wii, Wii U, 3DS, Switch, Animal Crossing, and e-reader. 5. Mario Bros. Not Super Mario Bros., just Mario Bros. No Super here. This is another arcade port, and weirdly, might be the worst arcade port on this list. Even if I find the arcade game to be superior, the gameplay of this game is fun enough for the NES port to be in the top 5. This has the best multiplayer of any game on this list in my opinion. The fact that you can play simultaneously instead of having to take turns is awesome, and if it does anything as good as the arcade version, it's the music and sound effects. Listen to those squeaky boots. It even has the Ein klein Nachmusik. And nobody comment that I pronounced that wrong, I don't care. The game is very accessible, being on the Game Boy Advance, e-reader, Wii, Wii U, 3DS, Switch, Animal Crossing, and even Super Mario 3D World. 4. Donkey Kong, a home console version of the game that made Nintendo the company that they are today. Even with Donkey Kong's legacy aside, this is still an awesome package. Not the most faithful port, it's missing a whole level and is a lot more horizontal, but I actually kind of like some of these differences. The more horizontal level design means you'll be dying a lot less from fall damage. The multiplayer is always a fun addition. The game is very accessible, with it being on the Game Boy Advance, Wii, Wii U, 3DS, Switch, NES Classic, and Animal Crossing. There's not much else to say. We all know Donkey Kong. 3. Duck Hunt. Now, most of these games were launch titles, but Duck Hunt is one of the few games to be sold with the NES itself. It is most likely known for being bundled together with another black box game, more on that later. It did well and was the second best-selling game on the system. As the name suggests, this game is about hunting ducks. Utilizing the zapper, you shoot ducks before they can fly away. There are 3 modes: shoot 1 duck, shoot 2 ducks, or shoot clay pigeons. It's weird, despite having to go through a lot of work just to play the game and not having that much meat on its bones, it's still one of the most fun experiences you can have on the NES. It's so beautifully simple and the sound effects are so satisfying. It's a game anybody can immediately understand and enjoy, and that's what the Black Box series was all about. 2. Balloon Fight. Now we are talking! I love Balloon Fight! The game involves floating around with balloons and popping your enemy's balloons while avoiding obstacles. When playing this, you immediately understand what to do, and it's fun to have a game with a more original world and characters. There are a lot of levels, and it is very replayable. There's also an endless mode of sorts, just avoid obstacles by seeing how long you can last. The game also has multiplayer, and even simultaneous multiplayer at that. The graphics are nice, with very good color choices. I like how the grass changes colors to look like different seasons. The animation is also very smooth. The way you float around the screen feels so lifelike. The music is also fantastic, albeit it gets drowned out by sound effects. The game is insanely accessible, being available on the Game Boy Advance, e-reader, Wii, Wii U, 3DS, Switch, NES Classic, PC-88, Sharp X1, MZ, 1500, and the Sharp Zaurus. You even get a playable version of the game in Animal Crossing on your birthday. Best birthday present I ever got. While the number one choice was obvious from the moment I even thought about making this list, Balloon Fight is a very close second. And the best black box game is 1. Super Mario Bros. Yeah, I think we all saw this coming. Super Mario Bros. Is one of the most famous games of all time. It's the 8th best-selling game ever. It basically saved the video game market from failing, and has been re-released on dang near anything with a screen. It has the most content of any of these games by a long shot, and has a great soundtrack, varied level design, a multiplayer mode, plenty of secrets, nice replayability, and good enough graphics. Even back when this game was new, it feels like anyone who starts playing immediately understands how to play and knows what to do. Except for Balloon Fight, this is like the only game on this list. Every other game on this list is like a high score thing. This is one with a real campaign. Congratulations, Mario. You earned it. The Black Box series has a somewhat of a successor series in the form of the Silver Box series. Again, this was a fan-given title, not an official thing. The Silver Box series consists of Metroid, Kid Icarus, and depending on who you ask, Rad Racer. The box template must have been unappealing because Metroid dropped the Silver Box for a yellow design. The Silver Box games also have a new genre, adventure games. Most people these days don't think very highly of the Black Box series. They see Mario and just some lame sports games. While yes, many of the games in this series range from underwhelming to straight up bad, I have a big appreciation for this series. Nintendo learned from Atari's quantity over quality mentality and aimed to give the NES a gallery of good launch titles. Sure, compared to later NES games, they're not as fleshed out, but compared to, like, the Atari games available at the time, these are phenomenal. This set the standard of what a good launch lineup would look like. Things like varied gameplay styles, technical showcase, multiplayer, and sports for some reason. Some games in the series even got sequels, like Super Mario, Excitebike, and Balloon Fight, and many of the games would go on to inspire other series. Many of the golf courses in golf were reused in Wii Sports Resort, and Clubhouse Games 51 Worldwide Classics. Tennis and baseball for Game Boy were heavily inspired by their NES counterparts. Characters like the Ice Climbers, Rob, and Duck Hunt are all playable characters in the Super Smash Bros. Series. Despite being a somewhat forgotten part of Nintendo's history, if it wasn't for the Black Box series, Nintendo and video games altogether might not exist the way they do today. So, thank you, Black Box series. Except for you, Urban Champion, get out!